So I'm Les Cook from the Wyoming Department of Education in Cheyenne. Dr. Tierno's education has spanned K-12 to higher education. Her 501c3 educational foundation, Let's Think Kids Foundation, has brought out her social entrepreneurship dedicated to school partnerships with teachers, students, and their families with specific training in the brain and how to think and learn. She is a recipient of the National Creative Thinking Recognition Award for innovative programs for teachers, parents, and kids from the Creative Thinking Association of America. Dr. Tierno, holds a doctorate in education, with her dissertation is focused on Hispanic parent engagement, which has evolved into her book, Using Brain-Based Learning to Engage Hispanic Families for ELL Academic Success. There are flyers on your tables that show her book, and she also has an exhibit later on today. And this book was published in 2019. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Tierno.
Thank you, Les. That was more than I had expected. I'm here as a researcher today. Oftentimes when you hear researcher, please don't run out of the room, because I'm also a developer and an author and a trainer. But I'm here to tell you about my programmatic research in my program called Think Parents Are Powerful. Now, it's really important to share that 25 years of working with Hispanic families has not just made me an expert, but has made me just as dumb as the world moves just as fast. So if anybody has not read Thomas Friedman's new book, please do. It is listed as one of my favorites in the back of my book. But I have to share with you that developing, refining, work with parents, as you probably know, is an ongoing thing. But at the very core of what I do and what I have been doing, there is a highly choreographed model that was funded twice with very large Title III grants, funded with urban system money and Title I money. The grants have expanded, the works expanded from Hartford to Waterbury to Dallas to Richardson to Washington, D.C., and up to Laredo, which is south on the border. My partner, Pat Campos, was to be here today. She wrote one of the forewords to my book. I am so deeply appreciative of her. But one of the things that happened is a mild heart attack. And nobody wants to be worried when they're flying across country, and nobody wanted to be here more than Pat, especially because she was my shepherd, my partner, when I started my dissertation work in Laredo. Interestingly enough, Marilyn didn't think brain-based learning was interesting enough for parents, so I knew the many superintendents, now since retired, but knew the one down south on the border, and he approved my IRB. So, having said that, let me just say this. We always, and I say this to you with a very fervent heart, Simon Sinek has a new book out that's called Start with the Why. Why are you worried, thinking, spending your career on working with parents? Why? In my first chapter of my book, there's a statement about communities. I kind of want to read just a tiny bit of it because my newfound author is David Brooks. Anybody ever listen to David on MSNBC or anywhere else on NPR? Find his new book, The Second Mountain. But he says, he writes a lot about communities. A healthy community is a thick system of relationships It is irregular, dynamic, organic, and very personal. Neighbors love neighbors, neighbors help neighbors, everybody goes to school, people live, work, shop, and are a part of one another. In my research, we found one of the greatest developments, and that was social capital building. So having said that, I want to ask everybody here, how many of you have had a friend of at least, if not more than 25 years? Raise your hand. Thank you. I feel like I'm in mass. Oftentimes when I'm supposed to read the gospel, I ask questions. And Father is like, please don't do that. You know, I'm dedicating this to my bestie of 25 years, who at 43, I mourned over the coffin. I don't think even as much as I mourned over my own mother's coffin. She died of suffering from 8 years of cancer, but left 5 children. So before she died, actually 2 months rather, she died on a Good Friday. And I said, listen, I gotta name our parent program. She helped me put it together. And I wanna name it Parents Are Terrific. Now, what do you think she said? Okay, you're totally crazy, okay? She said, I'm gonna be leaving this earth soon, and we need to share your why. Why are you doing this? You need to share how powerful parents can be with their children. Please, she said, please share that. Think Parents Are Powerful came and comes with a backpack. The backpack is special. It's powerfully organized. I created their very own portfolio filled with a Brain Bits book, the Think Right program, lots of strategies to use for homework, and my own children's books in English and Spanish. But the backpack is merely a symbol for the size, purpose, function, and facts that parents need to keep organized in their own brains in order to understand that of their child. I have to tell you, many a mommy, and I've done 1,500 of them, many a mommy has come back and said, I had to tell my kids last night, get your hands off that backpack. It's mine, and only for me. And that has given them a sense of ownership and purpose, something that's very important. So I'm talking to you today about my legacy and about Marie's legacy. We care about diversity. We cared enough to create surveys, Likert scales, documents and statements, profoundly collecting beliefs and belief systems of parents. My research took me into hours of reading every single word upon translation. The message is quite simple, very simple as a matter of fact. Here is my message, and I want you to take it home with you. When you care about someone more than yourself, you are a guardian. I think that the next video will share that whole meaning. Remember, when you care about someone more than yourself, you are a guardian. Please share with me.
In this week's Super Soul original short by filmmaker John Chester, we celebrate 25 years of The Alchemist through the watchful eyes of a different kind of shepherd. Happy Super Soul Sunday.
I'd probably say the lamb is the most vulnerable. And the coyote knows this. that's why we need the guardians. The Great Pyrenees breed has been used by shepherds for hundreds of years. They are the great protectors of livestock. They blend into the flock. Here we work them in teams of 2, and they're just best friends. They're with the sheep all year round, rain, shine, day or night. They're always aware of their flock. I mean, I'm sure they do sleep. I don't think I've really ever seen them fully asleep. And as the day ends, that's when they really go to work. They become fiercely protective. We rely on a simple process where the older dog unlocks the potential of the young guardian.
Okay, you ready for this?
The simple act of being welcomed and encouraged into the family is enough for them to begin to understand their life's purpose. Preparing them for the ultimate meeting with those who they will one day look after. If we think they're happy. That question assumes that nature's goal is happiness. Caring for animals has shown me a much deeper objective, which may apply to all living things. So this is my answer. I watch them care for something outside of themselves. And that purposefulness creates contentment. There are guardians in our pastures. They are real, and they are watching.
So that was special for you, because you are the guardians. Principals of our schools are the guardians. State Department people are our guardians. Anybody who comes into contact with those that work with the most critical stakeholder in our communities is a guardian. I show this to our parents. Even the translator cries. We all cry because we realize that the depth of what we're here to do sets about the role in which we play. We discovered in our research that the socio-emotional impact was great. Whatever the parents learned, they took it home. They shared the next day in writing exactly what it meant to their families, exactly what they learned and how they could incorporate it with their families. Brain-based learning and training involves what goes in your head as a parent and that of a child. Our key discovery, our second key discovery, was cognitive capital. We discovered that while most of the 40 research participants had a high school education, they knew very little about the fist-size object mass that was in their head. They knew very little about the brain. The brain has a structure, as you can see. It has a function. It's a bundle of neurons. It is something that I have to share one more really important quote. The human brain is the most complicated object in the known universe. Understanding the behavior of its 80 billion neurons is a formidable scientific challenge as interstellar travel. Now, you might be thinking, oh, this is too complicated. The name of my book is Andamio, which in Italian I say is Andamio. But I have to tell you, it means scaffolding. And when you begin to build scaffolding at the state level, at the district level, at the campus level, you have to build in your stakeholders as parents. They too need to learn about the structures of how to make their children's brains stronger. They need to know how to make sense and receive, perceive, organize, analyze, and evaluate what their children see and what they're learning. They also need to understand how its patterns organize and reorganize constantly. The brain has a cortex, or the higher thinking, the occipital lobe in the back, the spinal stem, the frontal lobes for executive function, and all the language centers that are tucked away in the gray mass area of our brain. Our parents learn about it all and what they can do. For example, from the frontal lobes for executive function, we organize, plan, and think. The frontal lobes, the biggest secret that I had to share, are not fully developed until the age of 16. So every first grade to 10th grade teacher now understands, and every mother of a teenager all the way down to a kindergartner understands now that it takes a lot for them to scaffold and build so that their children begin to build those frontal lobes. In our training, we use games like marbles. Remember marbles, guys? Okay? Jacks, playing with a map, puzzles, games children know nothing about today. Okay? They know the birds, and they know all the competitive games on their iPads. This is the swipe generation. The back of the brain handles spatial relationship, the thinking connections, structure, and functions that give children or give any human being object performance. When we tell parents about this, we tell them that it means once we teach the ABCs, we expect that, we hope that, we pray that they will remember that A means A, that B means B, that C means C. Also, it has to do with, do I remember my 1, 2, 3s? That object performance is particularly interesting when you're teaching children how to read. All parents want to help their children read at home. We also stress the need to understand that all children's brains are there. They're all different. They visualize, they hear, they watch totally differently. I used a lot of Reuven Feuerstein's work on the brain. He says there's only 3 issues with the brain: input, or what goes in, what's receptive; elaboration, or that process of parking it somewhere inside the brain, and output, meaning I see the word cat, I can hook up all the letters and put them together and say cat, and when I see a cat, I can say cat. This, in fact, has a lot to do with our memory system. If we didn't have memory, life would be a series of meaningless episodes. Memory is the process by which we retain knowledge and skills for the future. If you have not discovered that most of our children who have been on iPads have no memory at all, try stepping into a classroom with one. I want to share with you just a few short minutes of this particular clip about the neurons, the 80-some million neurons that have to connect in our children's brains. Please.
In the last module, we took first steps towards understanding the electrical properties of individual neurons. We learned how electrical forces and diffusion give rise to membrane potentials, and we learned how cells can generate and propagate signals called action potentials, or spikes, along the membrane. Understanding the properties of the neuronal membrane is essential, but understanding just these properties isn't sufficient to give us insight into collective behavior of the billions of connected neurons in our brains. Luckily for us, we can approach neuroscience at many different scales and levels of analysis, and we don't have to confront the full complexity of everything all at once. That's what we'll be exploring throughout the rest of this course as we slowly go from our understanding of single molecules, such as ion channels, to the electrical behavior of neurons, to their collective behavior in small circuits, and finally onto how they become organized in large functional regions of the brain. Let's start simple though. Since we've examined one neuron, a logical next question is how do two neurons connect with one another? We'll first examine some basic cellular anatomy of neurons. So far, we haven't made too much of the fact that the majority of neurons are polarized cells. That is, they have one portion of the cell for receiving inputs and another portion for sending outputs. The parts of the cells that are specialized for receiving inputs from other cells are called dendrites. The word dendrite comes from the Greek word dendron, meaning tree, and as you can see, the dendrites have a branching, tree-like structure. A signal received by a dendrite is passed to the cell body. If there is sufficient depolarization of the cell body membrane to initiate an action potential, then an action potential is sent down the axon. The axon then carries the propagating action potential to another neuron. So what actually happens at the boundary between two neurons, between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of another? This interface is called a synapse. There are two general types of synapses: electrical synapses and chemical synapses. Electrical synapses are less common in our own nervous systems, but they're simpler to think about, so let's start with them. Electrical synapses are basically pores between two cells that allow ions to pass through. They allow the passage of the electrical signal through to a neighboring cell without much fuss. It's not so different than just combining two cells into one larger cell. There are lots of reasons that nature might need synapses like this from time to time. They're fast and they allow cells to couple together with a high degree of synchronicity. But most neurons are connected together by a much more complicated structure called a chemical synapse. In a chemical synapse, rather than simply passing along an electrical signal from one cell to another, the action potential travels to the end of the axon and causes a chemical to be released into a very small space between the two neurons called the synaptic cleft. This chemical is taken up by the downstream neuron on the other side of the cleft. This chemical signal can cause the downstream neuron to depolarize its membrane, converting the chemical signal back into an electrical one. or it can have other effects on the cell. This chemical step is slower than transmission across an electrical synapse, but it opens up an enormously diverse repertoire of different and more complex kinds of signaling.
Thank
And
you.
synaptic function plays a critical role in computations performed by
I'm going to stop it there because it is so fascinating. We could stay here all day, and I understand that I only have a few short minutes. This whole video, parents are fascinated by, but the reason why I selected it and I get them fascinated is because I'm around kids and parents a lot. I know when they're on medication. I know whether the synapse is connecting. I know whether they can think or not. I know whether they've had too much sugar. I know what they've just gone through emotionally. All of it affects these neurons, their connectors, and whether there is any memory that comes out of it. Recall, then, is the most important. If the brain cannot recall information, it does not retain it. So short-term and long-term is important. We also, in our Brain Bits book, I give them this brain. I also give them, and I would not have schlepped them all the way here, but I have these plastic brains that everybody gets to hold, and it feels almost like a real brain, so that they can get the size, the feeling, and the form. You can see that up front there's thinking, and in the back you can see the inside where Wernicke is. You can see where all of the little patterns, all of the little pieces of language development happen. We learned in research, in my research, we learned that this brought great cognitive but more socio-emotional growth. They began, the parents that is, to understand their children much more intentionally. And when there's intention, it changes behavior. Now, if we moved one step further on this slide, this was years ago that I developed this, and you cannot begin to imagine how much fun it is for parents. It's in their Brain Bits book. And I developed it by researching the brain bits and the socio-emotional bits that children have at birth to age 4. And my mommies had children from 4 to grade 4. So I really had them look at birth to 4. The next one is, she's politely turning them for me, thank you. The next one is 5 to 7, where they have brain bits and socio-emotional bits. Now, what do we do with that? We have them up on big posters, and we ask the parents to form teams, and we ask them to find their children by these behaviors, these bits and pieces of brain behavior and socio-emotional behavior. Many a parent says, I have a 14-year-old that's acting like he's 8. Or I have an 8-year-old that's acting like he's 4. I get what he's missing. These are important, but there are also many other things that are important. It's important for parents to discover the cognition of it all. It's important for them to know that every brain has to grow like every other brain. And I'm sorry, but I don't believe, and it's just my little axiom, that standardized tests nor anything else is going to help us know how the child's brain grows. Parents know if we help them understand. We only get a glimmer and hope that we can read the data, but with the data comes knowledge of the relationship with the child, all the way to age 13. Now, we ask the parents to look Where is my kid on this flow chart, on this chart? Do they have socially emotional responses? In today's world of technology, many of the children are coming to first grade not having been in pre-K or kinder. Have you heard this? Raise your hand. It is, speaking from experience, not easy, because you have to go back to these brain bits and these socio-emotional bits, and you have to include your teachers in this training. You have to include margins in your curriculum so that parents know that their children are getting an equitable education. Now this one is kind of fun because I asked my parents specifically, okay, let's make some menus. It's important for us to make menus. What did your kids eat today? And this came out of a big problem that parents talked about. My kids are hyperactive, they're ADD, they're not listening to me. And after you talk with parents and teams over and over again, there's only the first question that I ask, and that is, what did your kids eat today? Was it one of these? Looks good. That's probably the first thing they eat. However, there's a lot that goes into that. Parents discovered that their children were not eating enough nutrient-rich food. So our research also took a look at what other things are your children having reactions to. Some medicine. I have kids that fall asleep in the classroom. First thing they get in the door. How about those sugars? Okay, here's one for you. 20 ounces of soda has the same amount of sugar, Coca-Cola in particular, as 6 donuts and 18 cookies. Please don't be upset if I see you eat a cookie. As I say in my book, when I went in the cafeteria and saw that the breakfast of the day was Cocoa Puffs, I really had to turn around and walk out, because teachers are behind the 8 ball once Cocoa Puffs goes into their system. I really think that somebody was one fruit short of the loop when they decided to pick Cocoa Puffs for breakfast. I will not even let first graders take chocolate milk for lunch because their behavior after lunch is so affected by the foods that they're eating. If you have not seen it, just do some observations. Now, why do I think this is important? One final issue I want to talk about, and that is sleep and technology. Our children, since 2007, when Steve Jobs announced iPhones on the stage and iPads, and just a few months later, Jeff Bezos announced the Kindle, our children have become part of what we term the swipe generation. Take those same kids and try to put them on a laptop or a regular computer, they have no idea what a mouse is. They think something's coming after them. Okay, now, you try to unconnect a child who's been on an iPad for several years, try to unconnect those dendrites and reconnect them for purpose, structure, and function, and you will see a lot of hard work that goes into it. Children today have to be responsible for more than just learning technology. And did we ever think we would be saying that? Okay? I find it important because the children of the last 13 years go to sleep at night with an iPhone or an iPad or the big screen TV. I have to say to parents, no iPhone. My biggest threat to children is, I'm talking to mom, no iPhone. I'll be good, I'll be good, I'll be good. Yes, I'm telling you, the LED lights are incredible. But more than that, the mood, the emotional moods that are affected by the smartphones, by the games, and by the iPads, by the LED lights are incredible. So a socio-emotional behavior that comes out of it is, how do I monitor and guide parents? The American Association of Pediatricians now has a new guide for parents. Look it up, on how to use gadgets and how to help your kids monitor and adjust their moods. Just 15, 20 minutes on their iPhones or their iPads, and you have a moody kid. So I try to share with parents. And by the way, my dissertation was finished in 2016. So 2015, 60% of my parents had technology gadgets. Today, all of those parents in the community have technology gadgets. So I'm sure that all of your parents have technology gadgets. It is not a babysitter. And I think that if we want role models, we have to help our parents understand that there has to be time set aside for it and time set aside for the real reading and writing kinds of things, the real doing math kinds of things also. And if you're from Imagine Learning in here, you can ignore me. I love you, but the process is set up, my process is set up for engagement, but there are several key factors that have to be consistent. This is what my mommy said. Home has to be consistent. Mommies that keep changing homes because they can't pay the rent, it's not consistent. Role models, we need to try to provide as many role models as possible. That's us. We're the guardians. The kids need their own space. When something happens at home and children have to take in a grandmother or a grandfather and give up their room, it affects them. They don't have their own space. They need sleep. I'm sorry, but school is long enough as it is. And they need to play, finish a short bit of something that was guided during the day, and go to bed. I tell all my kids every day, hot shower, get in bed. Hot shower, get in bed. They know it by heart. The most important thing here is your structure at home. The family unit is important. I don't mean it has to be the traditional family, but the loving adults of a family that can model. It can mean all the difference in a level 2 reader to a level 7 reader. And that is something that just recently happened to me. The child's mother went to jail. The grandmother had to take over. And within like 3 weeks, that child went from a level 2 to a level 7 reading. Just simply because her grandmother was structured, organized, and functioned differently in her home. That consistency is what our children need. And the last one, of course, is organization. And that's why we have backpacks, to keep it organized, to help them understand that your district can put whatever they want in the backpack, but parents have to feel like they have something of their own. The last thing I want to share about you and me as a guardian is that we are the shepherds in today's 21st century. We know that, like the lambs, these children are vulnerable. ELLs, all minority children are vulnerable. You are the protector in that school, in that state. So let's try to get it right. You are always aware. You have to be aware of what's going on with the children and their parents. You help create their happiness as a guardian. And last but not least, you, all of you, whether you're a district person, a state person, a person in my own Catholic church. Marie and I believed that you have a purpose. That's why you're an educator. You have meaning. You can make parents powerful. Thank you so much.